Thank you, Chief Rainey. Welcome to our first en banc hearing on large load users. I say first, I'm not sure, that does not mean we were going to have more, but welcome. I thank all the participants for testifying today. I will be very brief, providing some opening comments. I think we have, first off, we want to make sure what we're talking about here. We're talking about in front of the meter installations or data centers connected to our local electric company. We want to focus on that aspect of it, that niche of what we're talking about here, so we can hope to develop a model tariff. We have to provide fairness in both terms of non-discriminatory access to utility tariffs, as well as fair cost allocation for new and existing customers. We want to make sure we're protecting consumers and our ratepayers from potential stranded costs for upgrades for load that may not come into play. We want to provide certainty for customers regarding interconnection timelines and for utilities making investments in their infrastructure. And most importantly, transparency, so terms are easily understood by all parties involved, so that utilities are not competing against one another. We want to have a good, comprehensive plan here in Pennsylvania. We have a great opportunity here, and at the end of the day, we are hopefully benefiting all ratepayers. If we bring these installations in, again, connected to the local distribution system, the amount of load we're talking about here, all ratepayers will benefit from that. So that's what we're striving to do here today. Again, I appreciate all parties involved for participating. And with that, I'll turn it over to Vice Chair Barrow for some opening comments.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, everyone, for coming out today to listen to this very important discussion. I am entering into this discussion open-minded, wanting to learn, but also cautious. I'm cautiously optimistic that we can meet this problem, meet this challenge, and it's going to be a challenge. Where we are right now, at least in the PJM region, is we've got baseload retirements, we've got superstorms fueled by climate, and at the same time, we've got this unprecedented load growth, and the electric industry is used to growing incrementally. And what we're seeing is load growth where one data center coming online is using the energy of a mid-sized city. So we have to approach this very thoughtfully. Of course we can meet this challenge, but like the chairman said, it's going to call for transparency, and I'm going to put an adjective on that and say it's going to call for radical transparency so that this commission can do its job of ensuring reliability, ensuring affordable rates for all of our rate classes, and making sure that no cost shifts are occurring between distribution rates, between transmission rates. So cautiously optimistic and looking to learn so that we can put the right rules in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrow. Commissioner Zerfas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Pennsylvania is the Keystone state for a reason, right? We have abundant natural resources, a strategic transportation network, and a very robust workforce. So in that respect, we are ahead of the curve, unlike some other states, and we don't have to build too much for folks to want to come here. We want the economic development. We want the additional energy capacity. We just want to make sure we do it right. Everyone in this room wants to make sure we do it right. That's why we're here to have the conversation. So I'm just looking forward to the conversation today to learn and to take these steps forward with everyone here in the room, all of our partners, and thank everyone for their time and attention today. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zerfas. Commissioner Coleman.
Thank you, Chairman. I first want to acknowledge your leadership on bringing us together today. It was just a couple of short weeks ago that the chairman brought this matter before the five of us as a public meeting item, and I'm delighted that we're here today. I want to thank all of our testifiers who have traveled to be with us today. Looking forward to your testimony. Pennsylvania has always been a leader, and I consider us being a leader again here today in really grappling with a tough issue. The space that is important for us is across generation, transmission, distribution to the ultimate end user, to that customer. Our jurisdiction does not include that generation piece, and that seems to be where there is a significant amount of conversation these days. I would echo the Vice Chairman's comments that we are concerned about that cross-subsidization. We're curious to see how that's going to be addressed at the wholesale level and understanding what that means to ratepayers across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So again, welcome to all of our testifiers, and I'm looking forward to your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Our first panel is our large load customers. With us today, we have Michael Fredette, who is Principal Energy Services, Amazon Data Services Incorporated. Sean Smith, Vice President, Utility and Regulatory, Vantage Data Centers. Brendan Batts, Energy Market Development for Google. And Lucas Ficus, Director of Energy Policy for the Data Center Coalition. Welcome. Thank you again for participating. We would ask you for some opening comments. We did ask you to provide your testimony for the record, so thank you for that. And Michael, we'll start with you. And what we'll do is we'll just go down the line and then we'll open up to questions. Thank you.
Great. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. Good afternoon, Chairman DeFrank, Vice Chair Barrow, and members of the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. Thank you for taking the lead in hosting this hearing concerning interconnection and tariffs for large load customers to ensure Pennsylvania remains a leader in energy development as well as economic growth. My name is Mike Fredette, and I represent Amazon Data Services as a large load customer operating within the data center space. And I'll be providing opening remarks that largely mirror my written testimony submitted earlier. My role within AWS is to focus on and ensure that AWS has reliable, cost-effective, carbon-free, scalable power capacity to meet our customers' needs. Since launching in 2006, AWS has been providing world-leading cloud technologies that help any organization and any individual build solutions to transform industries, communities, and lives for the better. Amazon.com is the parent company of AWS, strives to be the world's most customer-centric company. This means we work backwards from our customers' problems to provide them with the cloud infrastructure to meet their needs so that they can innovate and redefine what's possible. As part of this testimony, I'll provide the Commission with a high-level overview of what a data center is and how they're integral to our daily lives. I will then touch on the challenges and opportunities we are facing today, followed by feedback regarding prudent design of large load customer tariffs. So, despite its name, cloud computing doesn't actually live in the clouds. It lives in physical data centers, which are the foundation of our digital world today. Every time you check your bank statement, stream a movie, connect with family ones online, or stream a live hearing as we're doing today, you're using the cloud, which is effectively enabled by data centers. Think of a cloud computing as electricity. Just like you flip the switch and a power company can deliver electricity to your door, organizations can access computing power, storage, and other IT resources on demand as needed and when needed through the cloud. In addition to housing the critical computing infrastructure to power our everyday lives, data centers also generate significant economic benefit for the communities in which they reside through job creation, tax revenue for schools and social services, and substantial local investment. More broadly, AWS data centers are the engine of the digital economy and digital backbone of modern life, with millions of customers, including startups, enterprises, governments, and agencies, look and trust AWS with their most sensitive data and depend upon our services. From hospitals and banks to first responders and government agencies, critical sectors rely on this digital infrastructure for every second of every day to power these essential services. At AWS, we continue to see continued record demand from our customers across the cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. Personally, when I look at my everyday life and that of my family, I find myself only increasing my daily interactions with the cloud, whether it be more video conferencing, interactive learning experiences, remote days for students home from school, telehealth, and even starting to dabble in AI to increase my daily efficiency. And for those of you kids, online gaming and massive multiplayer online games like Fortnite. I'm only finding myself more and more using it on a daily basis. Simply put, the cloud and the technologies it enables are driving innovation across industry. And to meet this growth, we're continuing to make significant investments throughout the U.S. to ensure that our nation remains a global leader in AI and machine learning technology. As U.S. electricity demands grow across several economic sectors, whether that be electric vehicle adoption, reshoring of American manufacturing, data centers, or the electrification of industry, we recognize the need for a balanced approach that supports technological advancement, sustainable energy practices, and fair cost allocation. The rapid growth of electricity demand presents both challenges and opportunities for the U.S. energy infrastructure. We understand the Commission's mandate to establish just and reasonable tariffs that provide open and non-discriminatory access to the public utility systems while protecting existing ratepayers. At AWS, we share these concerns and are committed to being responsible partners in grid development and energy consumption. We've demonstrated this through our commitment to our climate pledge goal of reaching net zero carbon by 2040, and additionally, all of the electricity consumed across all of Amazon's operations, including AWS, is matched with 100% renewable energy. We did this 7 years ahead of our target goals. We recognize that bringing on new sources of baseload, carbon-free energy is critical to meeting society's growing electricity needs and meeting that of our customers' needs. It is one of the reasons we're investing in a diverse portfolio of energy resources, including solar, wind, and advanced nuclear technologies. For instance, we've recently invested over $1 billion in carbon-free nuclear initiatives, including the Susquehanna nuclear facility and our equity investment in X Energy to bring 5 gigawatts of net new nuclear capacity online by 2039. That said, speed to market, coupled with ensuring we pay our fair share for the costs to serve our electricity that we consume, continue to be a priority as we work to meet this growing demand for our customers. And it directly influences how and where we make investments in both data center growth and energy development. So with these challenges and opportunities in mind, we're here to offer the following recommendations for the Commission's considerations. First, we urge the Commission to continue operating in a non-discriminatory manner that focuses regulations based on load profiles and cost of service models rather than targeting individual customers or industry types. Such an approach ensures fairness and flexibility across the industry and use cases while keeping the focus on cost causation principles. Second, utilities and regulators should continue to consider as a balanced overall commercial package the adoption of mutual commitments like reasonable contract term lengths, fair collateral requirements, minimum demand charges, and appropriate exit provisions, balanced with a corresponding commitment of service from the utility to said customer. These provisions ensure that costs to support large load customer growth are not passed along to other ratepayers and other customers, promote the efficient use of the transmission system, and need to be considered as an overall balanced package that typically are developed based on the individual utility and the regional needs, constraints, and opportunities that region offers. Third, the above commercial provision should be structured to enable utilities to swiftly integrate these large load customers onto the grid without shifting stranded cost risks to the existing or remaining customers. Large load customers like us work alongside our utility partners to cover our fair share of infrastructure costs. Transparent cost structures for interconnection with expedited development opportunities for users willing to self-construct infrastructure, such as substations or transmission infrastructure, and or source generation capacity at their expense, should be enabled to speed to market. Lastly, the development of such provisions should continue to account for the benefit that these large load customers bring to the system. Again, back to that cost causation principles. Large load customers, like data centers, provide stable, predictable load growth and a load profile that are critical to economic growth, U.S. leadership in cloud, generative AI, machine learning, And this growth is also supporting the reinvestment in and modernization of the U.S. electric grid for the benefit of all ratepayers. We believe these recommendations strike a balance between enabling rapid data center expansion, ensuring ratepayer protection. And they also align with the Chair's considerations for expanding energy investments, expediting interconnections, and exploring innovative approaches to grid enhancements. Integrating large load customers in a just, reasonable, and predictable fashion is critical to the economic growth and will continue enabling U.S. leadership in cloud computing, AI, machine learning. We remain committed to working collaboratively with the Commission, utilities, regional transmission organizations, and other stakeholders to develop solutions that benefit all Pennsylvanians. And again, thank you for your time, and I applaud the Commission for running towards this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Michael. Sean, before we turn to you, as I said, this is my first en banc hearing, but fortunately for Chief Administrative Law Judge Rainey, this is not his first. So he's going to swear you guys in right now before we continue hearing your testimony. Chief.
Okay, good afternoon. I am Chief Administrative Law Judge Charles Rainey, and I ask that everyone here turn off their cell phones or put them on vibrate. Call to order is today's en banc hearing concerning interconnection and tariffs of large load customers, docket number M-2005-305-4271. The genesis of today's en banc was a motion made by Chairman Stephen Frank in the public meeting of March 27, 2025, which was passed by the Commission. This is not an adversarial proceeding for the purpose of taking testimony on a number of topics that appeared in the Chairman's motion. This hearing is being video streamed live on the Commission's website and transcribed by the reporter sitting next to me, and it's also being recorded by me. After this en banc hearing, interested persons are welcome to file comments and reply comments. All comments are due on or before May 27, 2025. At the conclusion of the comment period, reply comments may be filed. All reply comments are due on or before June 11, 2025. And please reference the docket number N-2025-305-4271 on the first page of your filings. Filings may be made by opening and using an e-filing account through the Commission's website or by mail with overnight delivery addressed to the Secretary. Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, Commonwealth Keystone Building, 400 North Street, second floor, Harrisburg, PA 17120. This information is found on the Commission's website, puc.pa.gov. All right, the Commission has directed that its Office of Competitive Market Oversight, Bureau of Technical Utility Services, and Law Bureau develop a proposed model tariff for large customers seeking interconnection in the Commonwealth. The tariff will be available to all electric distribution companies and represent a preferred set of best practices based on the perspectives shared with the Commission by all stakeholders. A few housekeeping matters. For those here in Harrisburg of the Keystone building, please make note of the emergency exits, and also the restrooms are located on the 18th level near the north end of Forster Street at that exit. All witnesses are to have completed the hearing report form on the green sheet, as is noted. All witnesses in today's hearing have filed written comments with the Commission, and those will be marked for identification purposes and admitted into the record. So for the large load customers panel, we have a testimony of Michael Fredette, which is marked for identification purposes in Michael Fredette statement number 1. The testimony of Lucas Fikes is marked for identification as Lucas Fikes statement number 1. The testimony of Brendan Batts is marked for identification as Brendan Batts statement number 1. Sean Smith's testimony marked as Sean Smith statement number 1. For the distribution companies panel, C. James Davis, testimony marked as C. James Davis statement number 1. Kelly Gower, statement marked as Kelly Gower, statement number 1. Testimony of Richard Webster, marked as Richard Webster, statement number 1. Joseph Luca, testimony marked as Joseph Luca, statement number 1. And regarding the statutory advocates panel, testimony of Darrell Lawrence is marked as Darrell Lawrence, statement number 1. Testimony of Allison Castle marked as Allison Castle, statement number 1. All written testimonies of the witnesses having been marked for identification are moved into the record and they are admitted as a part of the record of this proceeding. A copy of the written testimonies have been provided to the board of court. The witnesses will testify as a part of the panel, and we do have the large load customers panel before us present. And that will be followed by the electric distribution companies panel and then the statutory advocates panel. The witnesses must refrain from discussing any matters that are the subject of a contested proceeding before the commission. I ask that each witness speak slowly and clearly and into the microphone so that their testimony can be heard and accurately transcribed. The witnesses are to proceed in the order that their names appear in the agenda. The witnesses are to state their name, title, for whom they are employed, and on whose behalf they are appearing in this proceeding. The witnesses are to then proceed with his or her testimony. Each witness will be allowed 10 minutes for testimony. Deputy Chief Counsel Elizabeth Barnes is keeping time. We are using a light system, and if that malfunctions, we will switch over to a flashcard system. Yellow light or yellow flashcard means that the witness has 1 minute left for testimony, and a red light or red flashcard means that the witness has 30 seconds to conclude their testimony. The commissioners will have an opportunity to pose questions after the testimony of each panel. The first panel, please all stand so that I can swear you in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony that you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Please be seated. Okay, Mr. Fredette, you have given testimony for the record. If you may just summarize that testimony at this particular time, you're having been sworn.
Absolutely. I provided testimony that largely mirrors my written testimony, and everything that I said prior to this is true and accurate, and I attest to that.
Okay. All right, then we will now move to our next witness, Lucas Fikes.
Thank you. Chairman DeFrank, Vice Chair Barrow, and Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to present testimony regarding large load customer model tariffs for electric distribution companies. I commend the Commission for holding this en banc hearing and for seeking expertise from stakeholders before the electric distribution companies make proposals. Sure.
Stating your name, also who you are, your title, by whom you are employed, and on whose behalf you are appearing at this proceeding.
My name is Lucas Fikes. I'm the Director of Energy Policy for the Data Center Coalition. I am testifying on behalf of the Data Center Coalition in this hearing. The Data Center Coalition, or DCC, is the National Membership Association for the Data Center Industry. DCC represents and advances the interests of the data center industry, aggregates industry expertise, and offers thought leadership and collaboration with utilities, policymakers, regulatory bodies, and other stakeholders. DCC's membership includes 36 leading data center owners and operators, as well as companies that lease large amount of data center capacity. Our membership includes both enterprise companies building data centers to support their own operations, as well as companies building or leasing space in data centers commonly known as multi-tenant or build-to-suit facilities. Today, there is unprecedented demand for the digital services that have become central to our daily lives and the modern economy. Everything from the way we work and learn to how we buy groceries, bank, and even access medical care now occurs online. With an average of 21 connected devices per household in the U.S., the role of data centers is expected to grow as consumers and businesses generate twice as much data in the next 5 years as they did in the past decade. This growth is driven by the widespread adoption of cloud services, the proliferation of connected devices, and the rapid scaling of advanced technologies like generative AI, which alone could create between $2.6 trillion and $4.4 trillion in economic value globally by 2030. The importance of data centers is difficult to overstate, in part because nearly every sector of the modern economy, American economy, relies on cloud computing, a service facilitated by data centers in some way. The importance of data centers can be measured financially, however. DCC commissioned a PwC 2025 impact study that shows the data center sector is a major economic force. In 2023, it supported 4.7 million U.S. jobs, including 603,900 direct jobs, up 51% since 2017. Those roles generated $404 billion in wages, a 93% jump over the same period. Direct contributions added $231 billion to GDP. Total annual contributions to U.S. GDP in 2023, including direct, indirect, and induced effects, totaled $727 billion. Each data center job now underpins more than 6 additional jobs across the economy. The industry also delivered $162.7 billion in federal, state, and local tax revenue in 2023, 146% above 2017, highlighting its growing fiscal value. After nearly 2 decades of relatively flat electricity consumption, the U.S. is experiencing a significant increase in power demand, driven by several economic growth trends, including onshoring of new manufacturing, widespread electrification of buildings, industry and electrification, hydrogen fuel production, and growth in demand for data center services. As noted by Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in the 2024 U.S. Data Center Energy Usage Report, the surge in data center electricity demand should be understood in the context of the much larger electricity demand that is expected to occur over the next few decades from a combination of electric vehicle adoption, onshoring of manufacturing, hydrogen utilization, and the electrification of industry and buildings. Supporting growing electricity demand through timely and prudent investments in new generation, transmission, and distribution infrastructure, along with investments in energy efficiency, grid-enhancing technologies, and other innovative strategies, is essential to the nation's economic growth, global competitiveness, and national security. As you're likely aware, utilities and regulators across the country are actively evaluating an array of approaches and provisions aimed at managing the challenges associated with load growth. DCC has been involved in and is currently actively participating in several regulatory proceedings in jurisdictions across the United States addressing large load tariffs. Those jurisdictions include Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Kansas, Missouri, and Oregon, and that list continues to grow by the week. In those proceedings, DCC has advocated for a set of best practices with respect to large load tariffs and has observed electric distribution companies begin to converge on some of those best practices as well. While each of the sub-issues on which the Commission seeks testimony and comment are important to DCC and its membership, given today's time constraints, I'll focus on addressing 3 issues for the Commission's consideration. First, I will address minimum contract terms and exit fee provisions. Second, I will address load ramping schedules. And third and finally, I will address financial security and collateral. Let me preface my comments about those 3 tariff-related issues by noting that DCC supports tariffs that standardize several of the terms that have traditionally been a component of contracts between utilities and large customers, but were bilaterally negotiated. However, you will hear me emphasize 3 themes as I discuss best practices on large load tariff design. The first is transparency. Tariff requirements and the basis for those requirements should be easily understood by customers and avoid leaving excessive discretion to the utility. The second is flexibility. While it is reasonable to require long-term commitments from large load customers, it is also reasonable to expect that businesses will change their operations and needs over the course of those long terms, and tariff requirements should reflect that reality. The third is diversity. The national data center market includes a diversity of companies, business models, and operations, and tariff terms that accommodate that diversity can help de-risk the utility. Turning now to the first specific issue I'd like to address, minimum contract terms and exit fee provisions. Minimum contract terms and exit fee provisions work hand in hand to create a measure of certainty for the utility, the large load customer, and all other customers. These provisions can mitigate stranded asset risk by keeping the customer on the hook far longer than is typically required under most existing large customer tariffs. There is no one-size-fits-all on minimum contracts. Each utility service territory and jurisdiction is different. From DCC's standpoint, it is important to tailor contract terms and exit fees such that those provisions reasonably reflect the investments the utility will have to make to serve large load customers. It is also critical that exit fee provisions encourage the efficient reallocation of capacity from a customer whose plans have changed to another customer waiting in the queue. Turning now to the second issue, load ramping schedules. Load ramps help both the utility and the customer. They allow both parties the flexibility to ramp up their respective activities. To put a finer point on this dynamic, utilities will often require several years of lead time to build generation and transmission infrastructure necessary to serve the full contract capacities of large load customers. And large load customers may require several years of lead time to ramp up operations to reach or near their full contract capacities. DCC supports tariffs that allow load ramps over a reasonable, even if limited, multi-year period, and allow contracting parties the flexibility to negotiate the specific terms of that load ramp. And turning finally to the third and final issue I will address today, and that is financial security and collateral. The basic function of a collateral requirement is to mitigate the risk that a large load customer does not make payments or does not materialize. And as a general matter, incorporating such a mechanism into a utility large load tariff makes good sense. However, the details matter. DCC strongly believes that financial security provisions should be designed to avoid promoting homogeneity in the market. To better achieve diversity, customers should have the flexibility to post collateral through a variety of forms, including parental guarantees, letters of credit, surety bonds, and cash. And utilities must allow data center customers a realistic timeline to sign tenants and post collateral. Finally, tariffs should include structured collateral phase-out schedules as utility risk decreases over time, such that the customer can manage long-term capital and planning. Again, Commissioners, I'd like to thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak directly to you on the subject of model large load tariffs. DCC and its member companies fully recognize the challenges associated with load growth and are committed to working collaboratively with the Commission, utilities, and other key stakeholders to develop solutions that advance an affordable, reliable, and resilient electricity grid for Pennsylvania. I look forward to answering your questions.
Next, we have Brendan Batts.
Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Brendan Botts. I'm employed by Google supporting energy market development, and I'm here on behalf of Google.
And your title, sir?
My title is Energy Market Development.
Thank you.
So I'm going to read a short prepared statement. I've also provided a longer version of this statement, which was uploaded last night. Good afternoon, Chairman DeFrank, Vice Chair Barrow, and members of the Commission. My name is Brendan Botts, and I'm here on behalf of Google to talk about large load tariff design and interconnection in Pennsylvania. We commend the Commission and Chairman DeFrank for proactively addressing the significant issues surrounding integration of new large loads onto the electric grid. I'm here today to talk about Google's approach to energy, some of the proposals we've been dealing with in other states, and why we believe we can address the current issues we face today under existing regulatory frameworks. At Google, we believe in collaboration and partnership to achieve sustainable energy solutions. We've been leading on clean energy procurement for years, having committed to carbon neutrality in 2007, and since 2017, matching 100% of our consumption with carbon-free energy sources, and have continued to do so even as we've continued to grow. Now our goal is 24/7 carbon-free energy by 2030, matching generation with consumption on an hourly basis. We're not just talking about it, we're actively doing it. In Virginia, we partnered with AES Clean Energy to develop a portfolio of carbon-free resources to serve our sites in that state. In Nevada, we worked with Fervo Energy on enhanced geothermal and created an innovative rate structure with NV Energy called the Clean Transition Tariff. We're also working with Kairos Power for advanced nuclear generation and with Duke Energy in the Carolinas on another clean transition tariff structure. Through these efforts, and among many others, we've become one of the world's largest corporate purchasers of renewable energy. We brought nearly 14 gigawatts of new clean generation online worldwide. Collaboration is key, and we're excited to contribute to today's discussion, which will help Pennsylvania achieve its own energy goals. While committed to clean energy, we also prioritize cost reduction and efficient planning. Utilities build to meet peak demand, so shifting or reducing those peaks is critical. Google's carbon intelligent computing platform shifts tasks to times and places where carbon-free energy is available. We're also engaged with the EPRI DC Flex initiative, which seeks to demonstrate how data centers can stabilize the grid through demand response. Voluntary demand response programs are essential, and we urge exploration of these options. Efficiency is also vital. Google leads in power usage effectiveness, which is a measure of data center efficiency, and policymakers should encourage the data center industry to pursue on-site efficiency. And this commission has shown a lot of leadership over the years through implementation of Act 129 and efficiency as well. Demand-side management is another area with a lot of untapped potential. We've partnered with local cooperatives in South Carolina and proposed funding for and provided funding for weatherization programs in Indiana and elsewhere. We also need to explore grid-enhancing technologies and advanced reconductoring, among other non-wires alternatives, to reduce new transmission costs and to ensure regional planning for transmission projects, especially through PJM's Regional Transmission Expansion Plan, or RTEP. However, as the demand forecasts have increased over the last few years, so have the number of concerning policy proposals that we've seen to address large load growth. These proposals include policies including moratoriums on new service for data center customers specifically, cost-benefit analysis as a prerequisite to get new service, arbitrarily high minimum demand charges, data center-specific customer rate classes, and other additional charges that are not based on cost of service. We've also seen proposals for mandatory service interruptions, burdensome behind-the-meter requirements, and direct assignment for shared system costs, among many others. These ideas often lack a basis in cost of service, can be discriminatory, and introduce unnecessary complexity and risk. While framed as risk management, these proposals threaten the cornerstone of non-discriminatory service, a principle that has been vital for nearly a century since the adoption of the Federal Power Act. This principle mandates that utilities provide service to all customers on a just, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms, protecting them from monopoly power and ensuring fair rates for service. Departing from the principle of non-discriminatory service introduces damaging uncertainty, chilling long-term investments due to regulatory volatility, and undermining the very predictability that utilities claim to seek. With significant load growth expected, it's important to mitigate investment risk and ensure forecasting certainty. While utilities traditionally have borne the risk of load forecasting, new large loads warrant placing some risk on individual customers. Google recently signed on to settlements in Indiana and West Virginia to ensure that large load customers pay for costs associated with their expected service through enhanced terms and conditions. We've also seen similar filings in Virginia with Appalachian Power and Dominion. We see these as a model to protect utilities and other customers while avoiding undue discrimination. The PJM load forecast projects nearly 30 gigawatts of load growth by 2030, which is a massive increase in demand. We need to adapt load forecasting methodologies and vet large load customer adjustments provided by transmission owners. Without certainty, we risk overinvestment, stranded assets, and potentially higher costs for existing customers. A model like Indiana or West Virginia with material upfront financial commitments can reduce uncertainty and help regulators plan effectively. While the challenges of large load growth are real, they do not justify abandoning fundamental regulatory principles. The existing regulatory framework centered on cost causation and non-discrimination is adaptable and provides tools to ensure new loads pay their fair share. These principles provide a solid foundation for managing increased energy demand from data centers and other large loads. By adhering to them, we can ensure that growth is managed sustainably and equitably. We do not need to create special rules or discriminatory practices We simply need to apply these principles effectively and work collaboratively to find solutions that benefit everyone. In conclusion, Google is committed to collaborating with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission to develop sensible policies that enable growth, protect customers, and advance clean energy goals. We believe in partnerships, fair cost allocation, and proactive planning. And with that, I conclude my remarks, and I again appreciate the opportunity to participate in today's hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Batts. And now we have Sean Smith.
Hello, my name is Sean Smith, and I'm Vice President of Energy and Utilities at Vantage Data Center North America, and I'm representing Vantage Data Centers North America. Chairman DeFrank, Vice Chair Barrow, Commissioners and staff, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. Vantage serves the leading American-based technology companies with global footprints by providing innovative and scalable data center campuses to hyperscalers, cloud providers, large enterprises. Founded in 2010, we are a privately held Colorado-based company with about 1,800 employees. We operate 35 data centers across 5 continents, and our approach is partnering with customers to develop flexible data center solutions for cloud computing and AI with the best-in-class customer service. Vantage is interested in developing hyperscale data center campuses in Pennsylvania to meet the growing demand for the digital infrastructure future. By one estimate, in the United States, we will grow from 25 gigawatts in 2024 up to 80 gigawatts in 2030. To continue to develop this infrastructure, it is critically important that the regulatory environment facilitates appropriate cost allocation for electricity generation and transmission, and the necessary approvals on a timescale that allow us and Pennsylvania to meet this unique moment in our nation's history. We appreciate the Commission's leadership in opening the dialogue on how interconnection and tariffs can be modernized to better serve large load customers while protecting the interests of all ratepayers and ensuring system reliability. Today, I'd like to offer 4 recommendations for your consideration based on real-world experience navigating large load interconnections and co-located generation in Pennsylvania and across North America. These ideas focus on encouraging new generation co-location, aligning financial requirements with project risk, applying consistent credit standards, specific contract terms that align with risk utilities and large load customers are taking, and tariff provisions that balance the needs of all parties. Number 1, recognize and reward new generation in the load interconnection queue. First, we encourage the Commission to recognize the system benefits when customers bring their own new generation alongside the new load. When a large load customer and/or developer co-locates with new generation, they are not simply adding demand. In reality, they are helping to offset their own load, improving system resiliency, and reducing net stress on the grid. We encourage the Commission to consider policy tools that could prioritize such projects in the load and generation interconnection queue. This can include explicit scoring advantages, creating a separate queue track for new load that brings new generation, and earlier access to system impact studies. Doing so would send the right market signals that if a customer helps solve the grid problem rather than contribute to it, they deserve a faster path forward. This is especially important in constrained areas where large load interconnections are highly competitive. By prioritizing the interconnection of large load that also brings new generation resources to the grid, it will maximize the ability to grow new load while minimizing the stress on the power grid and avoiding any impact to ratepayers. The Commission has a timely opportunity to shape proactive policy in this space, encourage innovation, and champion customers who are taking proactive steps to support reliability by giving those projects priority in the queue. Number 2, deposits or financial security for large load customers. Financial assurance requirements for large new loads must be fair, proportional, and grounded in actual risk. A one-size-fits-all approach fails to reflect the diversity of data center business models, credit profiles, and risk mitigation strategies already in place. For example, exempting large hyperscalers from collateral requirements while applying them to third-party providers leasing to those same companies creates an uneven playing field and undermines healthy competition. We recommend a flexible framework that reflects utility risk and recognizes customer investment as follows. A, timing of collateral requirements. Collateral should be required only when the utility's financial exposure is at its peak, typically within the year preceding energization. Requiring collateral earlier not only misaligns with the actual timing of risk, but also unfairly strands significant customer capital, often hundreds of millions of dollars well before the customer is expected to receive service. When a project remains several years from coming online, the utility retains ample opportunity to mitigate potential exposure. Further, collateral structures should align with the phased nature of large load projects and should reduce over time as risk declines. Once a large load customer is taking service, there should no longer be a need to maintain as high amount of collateral. Any tariffs related to a customer's collateral obligation should also include a schedule of how the collateral will be reduced over time, which is critical for customer capital planning. Utilities must also retain collateral in a timely and transparent manner. The amount of collateral. A collateral amount should correspond to the utility's actual at-risk investment. Requirements should be based on a realistic assessment of potential loss, including the utility's ability to repurpose infrastructure and a holistic approach to customer risk evaluation. Factors such as operational history, performance of prior projects, and the strength of equity backers provide meaningful insight. Additionally, if a data center developer has a lease signed with a creditworthy tenant, such as a well-known hyperscaler, the creditworthiness of the tenant should be the basis for setting the amount of the collateral obligation. Failing to account for these relationships unfairly penalizes third-party operators. Utilities should have the discretion to grant exemptions where warranted by these broader indicators of creditworthiness. Form of collateral. The form of collateral accepted must be flexible. Customers should be able to meet obligations through a range of instruments, such as parental guarantees, letters of credit, surety bonds, or cash. Performance by the utility. By providing collateral, large load customers are significantly de-risking utility investment. Equally important, if customers are required to post collateral, utilities should commit to performance. Financial guarantees should be mutual. Utilities must provide firm commitments on energization dates and ramp schedules, enabling customers to invest with confidence. Without insurances, one-sided collateral obligations expose customers to undue risk and will limit private sector investments' appetite to invest. Utilities should be held to enforceable delivery timelines or face consequences for delays. Contracting provisions need to have similar binding financial requirements on the utilities to meet their proposed energization timelines as the utilities put on customers to meet their requested in-service dates. Minimum charges and contract terms. Number 3, Vantage Data Centers secures long-term leases with hyperscaler companies. It is important to have power certainty during the term of the lease while having options that power at the conclusion of the contract will have automatic extensions. Minimum contract terms should be in the 8 to 10-year range, assuming extension provisions are built in. We recommend demand charges not to exceed 75% as long as there's ramping provisions in place. We have seen minimum demand charges in other jurisdictions, and they can be appropriate provided they include ramping provisions that account for a phased build-out of data center campuses over multiple years. Finally, tariff provisions. I can just glide over a few of these as I get to my final. Large loads should be classified based on their power demand. We think that the provisions of the tariff should start at about a 50 megawatt threshold. Your Honor, Commissioners and staff, thank you again for the opportunity to testify today on these topics for the state of Pennsylvania that can have significant economic benefits and serve the national security interest.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. The large load customer panel having provided testimony, I now call upon the commissioners for any questions. Chairman DeFrank.
Thank you, Chief Rainey. Before I start with my questions, I would like to recognize a person in the audience. We are joined by our House Oversight Committee Chairman, Danilo Burgos. Chairman Burgos, welcome. Thank you for coming. We appreciate your interest and welcome to the PUC. And with Chairman Burgos is the committee's Executive Director, Tim Scott. Tim, welcome as well. Thank you for your testimony. I do have a few questions, and then we'll open it up to our other commissioners here. First question, it's all about speed of market, right? It's all about interconnection timelines. What is a reason, or what would you guys say is a reasonable interconnection timeline? And I'd ask you to separate the timelines out. We're talking about an interconnection study as well as interconnection build out. What would be an appropriate timeline for a study? What would be an appropriate timeline for a build out, and then total? Michael, if you want to start, please.
Absolutely, thank you. I think it's important to recognize that individual projects will have their own specific schedules based off the infrastructure required. But having a transparent and known, what we call SLA or committed timeframe for feasibility studies and system impact studies is something that is very important. And we have seen a wide range of how quickly that can be done, from within a month to many months. We've worked with RTOs throughout the U.S. to improve their processes as well, and giving them solutions. But the ability to do it within kind of that 30-day time period is reasonable for those initial studies, and something that we would very much target. The physical infrastructure that needs to be built out, that is often dictated by the long lead equipment required. And what we push for and encourage is the flexibility for the entities to enable the procurement and acceleration of that through cost-sharing mechanisms and sharing of that risk appropriately to realize speed to market for customers that value that speed to market.
Anyone else want to add to that, please?
I would just add, that kind of 3 to 6 month time frame for a general load study seems to be a good target. When it gets to years, it gets really tough. If they obviously can do it faster, great. We have relationships in the industry, I'm sure all of us do, where we can bring resources to bear on that. In terms of the power on, helping on the long lead items is critical, and making sure within the tariff that in certain jurisdictions, we're not allowed to bring a long long lead equipment to bear. And if that's part of the tariff, that's very helpful, that, as long as we're building to the specs of the utility, that we can bring high side breakers, we can bring transformers to bear, and that ranges widely across the country.
Just a few additional comments to add. I think Michael and Steve did a good job. I think transparency and certainty are critical elements, and when we're waiting months to even a year for a study, it's very problematic, obviously. But having that certainty or having some maximum time established, I think is critical for those types of studies. Additionally, it's something that we're concerned with, and I think just a few weeks ago there was an announcement about Tapestry, which is a AI integration into some of the PJM operations, and the intention there is to increase the speed of those interconnection studies. So it's something we're actively working on to improve, but also realize the situation we're all in today, and the certainty is a critical aspect.
I don't have much to add to what the other panelists have already mentioned. A 3 to 6 month time period for interconnection studies is reasonable. As noted before, when we're exceeding a year, that can become significantly problematic. We're also seeing interconnection timelines in different states that we're engaged in, going from 2 to 4 years is what it used to be several years ago. Now we're seeing 4 to 7 years, and we've even seen places talk about upwards of 10 years to actually get interconnected. That ties up significant capital and can be very concerning to many of our members. So both of those aspects are very important: scheduling, transparency, making sure the customer knows what to expect, and the utility are held to the timelines promised is important as well.
Next question again for all four of you, please chime in. Vice Chair Barrow in her opening comments talked about the load here, and we're talking about load of a size of a small to mid-sized city here. Load shifting, it's a way of managing, load during peak hours. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that a real concept? I think it would probably, does it depend on the size of the data center? Does it depend on the number of facilities you have? What is your ability to be able to scale down one center that may, be located in a congested or in an area that we're having some grid issues at a certain time, where you can scale that load down and transfer those services to another facility? Is that possible? Is that doable? Because again, as the Vice Chair said, we're talking about large load here in just one facility. So being able to power a facility back or down, is that possible? And, because again, if we're able to do that, doing that to one facility helps manage the grid overall. Michael, you want to start? Well, we started with Michael last time. Lucas, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm happy to start on this question. We'll note, as I mentioned earlier, we have 36 different members that are owners and operators of data centers. They have very diverse business models, and particularly when it comes to load shedding, certain of our multi-tenant facilities, some of those may have one tenant, others may have upwards of 200 tenants. And whether it's cloud services or providing some of the critical government type services, it really is difficult for some of our members to shed load or to move load from one facility to the other, partly because they don't own the servers that are within their multi-tenant facilities, and so they have no ability to shift that load. It's also worth noting that generally, data centers do require 99.999% uptime, and so if load is required to be shifted, electricity demands are required to be reduced. The backup diesel generators that many of these facilities use would have to be turned on to maintain that uptime, which can run into issues with air permitting and requirements along those lines. So while the others on the panel can speak a little bit more to their individual facilities and companies and their ability to do that, I think it is worth noting that uptime and kind of the critical functions brought by data centers are very important considerations when looking at load shifting or demand response.
So just before the rest of the answer, is it fair to say then, a larger data center, a larger entity may have a little easier time with load shifting than some of your smaller members? Or not necessarily the case?
I don't know that that's necessarily the case. It really does depend on the business archetype and the individual data center and how they how many tenants they have and how they operate. But I'm sure some of the other panelists may be able to speak more on that.
Sure.
Yeah, so I did speak to this issue a little bit in my opening remarks. It's an issue that Google is concerned with. It's an issue that we're working on every day internally. I spoke a little bit about our carbon intelligent load shifting. That's really just a few percent that we're using for that, but we're also developing capabilities for demand response. One of the, and again, we're doing that in coordination with EPRI's DC Flex initiative, which I think intends to pilot some of the demand response initiatives at data centers. But I will say that the current rules on demand response or interruption are challenging. 5-minute notice, 30-minute notice is very challenging to turn down a significant amount of load in that level of time. So I think, to expand potential for demand response, we may want to look at a different structure of that to allow a longer lead time, a longer notice time, if that's possible. And I think that would improve outcomes on demand response.
Sean?
Yes, thanks for asking that, actually, Chairman. It's actually in my written testimony, talk a little bit about this, where it's really about simplifying the process with the demand response programs. In other jurisdictions, when we were trying to do a microgrid, for example, they were asking us to be a generator operator. So we have been able to move to a demand response program where we wouldn't have to be FERC-regulated generator operator. So that's one case where making the rules similar where you're in the tariff that it's a drop of load during that time period. Of course, it has to be in certain jurisdictions where air permits are allowed for that. I'd say the second point there is also on co-location. So what I talked about with this new generation, obviously those components can be built in where you build enough generation to handle those peaks, and those could go out to the grid working with independent power producers. So that's a component that there are solutions there. And finally, Vice Chair Barrow, the growth to really focusing on ramp, we hear a lot of headlines about gigawatts and this and that. These are long, slow ramps usually, and so really focusing on the megawatts that are coming to bear over the years is important to really not just seeing the headline.
So one follow-up real quick. So, if you are willing to shift load or you can adjust load, is that given into consideration in the load study? I mean, are you talking to the electric company on the front end where that information is then considered as they're doing the load study?
And it's not actually shifting load, it's bringing on, generators in the
Generation.
background.
Okay, so
right.
you're firing up your
and so
on-site generation.
in that case, there's a negotiated notice period. We would prefer with a market like this that you would know a day ahead, hopefully in the day ahead market, and an hour ahead at the smallest amount of time. So when it's seconds, that's when you start to get into the whole generator operator, regulation up, regulation down. That's not going to be us.
Got it.
Michael. And I'll just echo Sean's points. It's important to recognize that, when you're talking about these large campuses, you don't flip a switch and the entire data center shows up. You build out data centers, many data centers within those campuses, and then within each of those data centers are electrical rooms, and those many electrical rooms feed individual data center racks. And so the load growth that you see is very linear and steady, right? It's not an immediate load that hits the system. I will echo what Mr. Fike shared in that it's important to recognize that there are different types of data center operators out there. For Amazon, for us, we work backwards from our customer needs, and we need to provide them with highly reliable, uninterrupted power. So it is not as easy as simply saying, can you shift compute workloads to idle compute power you have somewhere else in the world? Today, it is not structured in that way. Having kind of large load flexibility like you're talking about would require significant planning, coordination, incremental investments, and that would all have to be planned out years in advance to accommodate that. There are demand response programs out there in different markets, and I think I just would echo the points made earlier. So,
And we're in the same boat as Google and AWS. We contract for someone that gets 100 megawatts, they get 100 megawatts. We don't have flexibility on moving that up and down, except on the generation side.
So talking about uniformity versus flexibility, I mean, we talk about transparency in rates, and it's good to have that uniformity for transparency, but we also talked about flexibility for individual products or projects to help bring those online. I'll ask each of you, how do we balance that, the uniqueness of individual products and projects and being able to be flexible with those projects compared to uniformity that provides that transparency?
I would just share, I think it's how the commissions have done in the past, which is working backwards from the data, right? Going as you're making policy decisions or regulations or approving specific contracts or agreements, having the fundamental data behind the decisions that you're making to justify those incremental obligations or services that are being offered. So working backwards in a transparent way from the data to justify the steps forward.
Anyone want to add to that?
Just to add briefly, I think, collateral was spoken about quite a bit already. I think collateral is a good example of an issue where you can have a collateral policy that's uniform across tariffs and require some level of collateral to get that upfront financial commitment from the new large load customer, but also allowing some flexibility based on circumstance, based on risk profile of the utility, and other factors as well.
Yeah, just to add a couple points, when coming up with new tariffs to deal with large load customers, balance is important, but also durability is important as well, making sure that we are creating solutions that last the test of time, so that every time a new large load comes online that requires significant electricity, we already have a model in place that can address those loads, the sequential waves that are coming after data centers. We all acknowledge that right now, in this moment, data centers are driving a lot of the load growth, but as the LB&L study that I had noted in my testimony said, we do anticipate in the coming decades for significant amounts of electricity to be required from the grid. And so making sure that Pennsylvania has a durable solution in place, which, as we've discussed here, includes flexible collateral requirements, includes minimum demand charges that are catered to the individual utility archetype and not painting with broad strokes, requires contracts over long-term periods. Those are all important, but going back to the discriminatory piece of a data center-specific tariff, I would caution the Commission to avoid that approach to ensure that you do have a durable solution where we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time a new load comes online.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more, which is why we're here today. Michael, I had a question for you. One of the things you talked about in your testimony was if the end user built out some infrastructure, if the end user is willing to do that, would that result in interconnection times, quicker interconnection times? Can you expand a little bit about that? Because I'm very intrigued by that. I actually put that in the seed motion when we first started talking about this a few weeks back. I think that is a way of, potentially interconnecting quicker, as well as insulating the customer from potential stranded costs, because if you're paying the bill for it, we don't have to worry about that customer being stranded with those costs. Is that happening in any other jurisdiction that you're aware of? And maybe put a little more flavor on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think both myself and Sean touched about it earlier, which is, there's a few different buckets to consider here. One is LLE, so long lead equipment, and ensuring that there are mechanisms that allow customers to take that long lead equipment kind of off the critical path, whether or not the customer is delivering the end solution or not, being able to supply that LLE to utilities to help accelerate and de-risk those utilities investments in those schedules is one area. The other that we've seen globally is customers being able to what we call contestably build utility infrastructure and then donate it back or transfer it back to the incumbent transmission operator. Not necessarily a requirement, but these are flavors and structures that are out there and employed today that provide flexibility. The utility can still do that, and also in certain circumstances, the customer can self-deliver that infrastructure where they're able to do it in a way that better meets their needs.
And then I had one other question, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues. But Lucas, I wanted to ask you, you represent nearly 40 companies, and I suspect they run the gamut. They're not all the Googles and Amazons and Vantages of the world. What type of challenges are some of your other companies who aren't next to you, some of your smaller companies? What are some of the challenges that they're facing that we haven't discussed here yet today, if any?
Yeah, we do represent a diverse number of companies, of data center owners and operators. I would say one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in this new era of new large load customer tariffs that we're seeing across a number of states has already been mentioned here, but maybe to add a little bit more flavor, it really is around collateral. Not every company is the same size, and while some of the larger companies are able to be exempted from collateral by having high credit ratings, other companies that are not publicly traded or may not maintain those credit ratings can be put at a significant disadvantage if the provisions that are included in a filing by the utility or approved by the commission are too onerous. So we really do look for flexibility there, whether it applies to the exemption portion of that or the forms of collateral that are able to be provided by the customer. It's important, everybody that's represented on this panel, I'm sure looking to do business in Pennsylvania or looking to do business elsewhere, but there's a lot of other companies as well that may not be publicly traded, but are very viable companies with long track records of good business, paying bills on time, things like that. So it's really important to take that into consideration as these tariffs are filed, just to make sure you are not blocking off a part of the market to a customer that could be a great benefit to the state.
Thank you, Chief. I do have a few other questions, but let's turn it over to other commissioners. Do you want me to recognize them, or are you doing that?
You can recognize them if you wish, Mr.
Great.
Chairman.
Vice Chair Barrow.
Thank you. Thanks, gentlemen. So following up on the chairman's questions about load flexibility, I think he covered that pretty well. One of the things I'm wondering about is when it comes to that load flexibility, and I understand that all this load isn't coming on at one time. I understand that you do ramp up, but I also hear from PJM looking out less than 5 years, then looking out 10 years, that the sheer volume of the megawatts that y'all are going to be drawing from the grid is something we have not seen in our lifetime. So I still have that concern about once a hyperscaler is up to its full draw, that it's the size of a small city. And our cities were built over many, many decades, if not centuries. So on the load forecast and the accuracy of the load forecast, what as an industry are y'all doing to make sure that it is accurate? Because that's the number one thing I keep hearing is we don't know, we just don't know how accurate it is. What kind of information are you? So the RTO will say, we get this information from the companies. We get this information from the EDCs. They don't necessarily match what's happening there. We can go down, Michael, and head that way.
Well, I would just say we recognize the challenge, and I think from Amazon we're focused first just on making sure that the infrastructure that we're delivering is the most efficient infrastructure that we're delivering, and then the chips and the compute power and the cooling that goes inside of those buildings is again the most efficient possible. And then we're sourcing and enabling and bringing on carbon-free energy to support that. As it relates to working with PJM and RTOs and our utility partners, we work very closely with them on a regular basis to provide our forecasts both to the utilities as well as to the RTOs, communicate that with them, and ensuring that that load planning process continues to evolve. We echo that. We think it is an area of focus that should be taken up by the industry, and through our industry stakeholders, we have presented solutions and presented recommendations on that.
Within Vantage, one of my employees actually works closely with our hyperscaler customers to forecast that load. So we are hyper-focused on that topic because we know getting the right information to our utility is critical. We're pretty conservative too on, we don't really build projects until we have a customer. So I know there are plenty of speculators out in the industry, and you'll get that. So I don't have specific recommendations on that. Just the fact that we've been in business for 14 years. And so I think track records of, hyperscaler data center developers is critical too. And coming up with a plan on how to actually, when is the right time to count those megawatts is what we're trying to work through in our brains.
So load forecast is an absolutely critical issue. I spoke a little bit about it in my opening remarks. And people ask all the time, is the PJM load forecast real? And it's not. It's inflated. I think there's some speculation in the load forecast. The way the transmission owners provide the load forecast, or the LSEs provide load forecast to PJM, varies by company. Some of them will put all of the data center requests that they've received in the load forecast. Some of them will put only what's under contract in their load forecast, and then some will take a portion of what's in the contract into the load forecast. And I spoke a little bit earlier about settlements that we had reached in Indiana, West Virginia, that set up a framework to establish financial commitments from new large load customers. And every megawatt that goes into the load forecast should be under contract or near under contract within that framework from our viewpoint. And firming up the load forecast has a lot of benefits. It provides some certainty to the market and when and where to build. And it also will reduce system costs for all customers over time. And it, again, gets rid of a lot of the speculation that I think is causing us all a lot of headaches.
I don't have much to add on this point. I will note that DCC does not conduct our own load forecasting. And I agree with everything the other panelists have said. 3 key points when it comes to load forecasting that we do try to promote: transparency. The customer the electric utility, PJM, there needs to be some level of transparency so that customers know what happens once they submit their load forecast to the utility before that goes up to PJM. Open lines of communication plays into that as well. It shouldn't just be a discussion at the beginning of the load forecasting process. It should be an ongoing conversation between the customer and the utility to ensure that those forecasts are right-sized. And then the last thing is consistency. There's a lot of differences in how different utilities forecast load. And, the terms and conditions, the enhanced terms and conditions we've talked about that we've seen in other large load tariffs, they do help promote that consistency. So those are the 3 points, noting that DCC doesn't perform load forecasts, but certainly agree with the other panelists' comments.
So Lucas, I mean, I'm actually surprised to hear that DCC does not, as the association. Somebody has to play the role of the honest broker when it comes to this. Since y'all don't, who do you believe should be responsible for that? Who has a line of sight into all of the information that's needed to get that accurate forecast?
The reason why we don't do load forecasting is we are limited in what information we have from our members around load forecasting. I would say who should be responsible for load forecasting. Again, it should be that communication, that open communication and transparency between the customer, the utility, and then the RTO as well. Making sure that the communication isn't broke down between those different entities. They're all speaking to each other over time to ensure that load forecasts are right-sized.
I think one thing I'd add there to Vice Chair is, having set progression milestones for these large loads, once if we follow the 3 to 6 month timeline to get the study done, there are set timelines, which I think might help weed out some of the speculators in queue. And, the queue needs to be, generation queue's it's very public, you don't necessarily know the companies, that's confidential, but you know what's in line. And in most parts of the country, no one really knows what's in line. So transparency is important, but also, knowing where all these megawatts are is important too.
It is. So my next question, you just mentioned transparency being important, and I think earlier I mentioned radical transparency is going to be important. So this commission's job is going to be making sure that that we follow cost causation principles and making sure that there are no cost shifts, unnecessary, unreasonable cost shifts between rate classes. Are we going to run into problems or get any pushback from your companies about getting access to information about the contracts that you enter into with our EDCs or transmission companies? Because that's another part of the whole cost issue. So will the response be, if we ask for certain information about projects, that's confidential? Cost information.
So I just to respond to that, it's a great question, and I think the structure that we've been talking through, where you design a novel or a uniform tariff with these additional requirements and commitments. Once a customer takes service under that tariff, there would be a contract, and the state rules on this vary. In some states, commission reviews and approves these contracts, in other states they don't. And I would think they have obviously a right to know some level of information as part of the review of those contracts. So I would expect that would happen as part of that normal process. And that information about the projects and the load forecast and the associated information about the development would be shared at that time.
And when you're sharing that information too, I mean, in other jurisdictions, there's also a set period of time that confidential information is not disclosed hourly. So we've seen that where it's redacted. so that's important for our competitive advantages. So, with that in sight, when I've seen generators, you're not in different parts of the country quoting pricing on contracts. So those are all critical. That competitive data is only for your eyes there.
Thank you. Lucas, you mentioned the need for, at least I believe it was you, tariff flexibility over the term, like over the long term, the need for tariff, like flexibility of terms in the tariff. What did you mean, or did I mishear you?
I think you may have misheard me. My comment was around durability and making sure that the tariff would apply to all large load customers, which can handle subsequent waves of load growth coming from other industries down the line. I did also mention that wherever the commission falls or on minimum demand charges, extended contract exit fees, collateral really should be based on the individual utility archetype and that utility's risk tolerance. So there may be some flexibility across different utility jurisdictions, just avoiding the one size fits all approach.
Okay. And one more question for everyone. What exactly is the concern with having a separate standalone rate class for, or, what are the concerns with having a separate rate class for data centers? And it was Brendan, I believe, who said there was maybe some worry about that.
Yes, you're recalling that correctly. And this speaks again to the issue of undue discrimination, where, it's a standard precedent and a longstanding regulatory principle. We treat similarly situated customers the same. And if you have a new customer who is a battery manufacturer and they have a 300 megawatt load and they sit next to a data center who's also a 300 megawatt load, they're both imposing the same electric demands on the system. And their user profiles are not that different. So in our view, there's really no reason to treat them differently. And the purpose of a lot of the new large load tariffs across the country are to ensure that new large load customers are providing sufficient revenue to cover the new investments that are needed to serve them. And if you're a 300 megawatt battery facility, you're going to impose the same need for a transmission upgrade or generation upgrade in the system than a data center would, and therefore it should be treated the same.
Does that change at any, does it change when it gets to a gig? Does it change?
Well, in terms of applicability on the size, we've seen on the new large load tariff size, we've seen anything from 25 megawatts to 500 megawatts. And the general idea is to capture a customer who's imposing new costs on the system. And we generally propose or recommend 75 megawatts as a threshold for that. It's a standard they use, I think, in Texas for new transmission build. And it will generally capture the most significant new large loads that are imposing new costs on the system.
Thank you. And just a comment. I don't necessarily expect an answer because I know y'all touched on this a bit. I get a little worried when I hear about diversity of collateral because different players have different risk profiles. And that makes me wonder because I also have to look out for the rest of the customer base and the health of the utilities, whether there's a certain risk profile that we shouldn't even consider. If you need that specialized of a collateral requirement, maybe this isn't the game for those developers. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Coleman, anything?
Thank you, Chairman. I realize we're coming to the end of our time, and I run the risk here of being gavelled by Judge Rainey, so I'll be quick about it. I just wanted to go back. I'm just curious about the planning effort here and bringing your own generation to the table, which I applaud. I'm curious, and the reason we're having this discussion today is because, of course, we're talking about being in front of the meter. So my question for you is, what is the thought process about redundancy that keeps you completely behind the meter and does not subject you to this kind of a proceeding, where your generation is owned exclusively by your developer, your landlord, your company, whatever the case may be, and again, avoids this discussion?
Yeah, I can take that, Commissioner. So, you know, in our model, what we're thinking about is when you go fully behind the meter, you still have to meet what's called 3 nines, so 99.9% reliability for our customers, which is about 8 hours of outage a year. So that's a lot of extra turbines or recipient engines that we'd have to keep on site to keep for the ready, right? So there's studies on how many we need. And the thought process here is actually to work with the local utility that it doesn't have to be out of the gate, but longer term, we're connecting those resources to the grid. So you're bringing the capacity that not only helps you, but helps the entire grid. So it really benefits the whole system, and we get the bonus, right, of helping out other folks and also bringing those resources to bear, you know, potentially not at all the units we need to bring on. So just, it's a partnership we see, a agreement long-term with the utilities.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to add to that briefly. I think it's important that we do both. We have the discussion here today about a tariff to become a customer of the system, but we also allow the flexibility for a customer to have their own on-site generation if they choose to. And I think, you know, if a customer chooses to do that, if they've done the financial analysis and that's what works for them, I think they should have the option to do that. And I think it could bring some of the facilities to market faster, and I think it could reduce costs. But at the same time, I think we should also have a pathway where a new large load customer can join the system. And as Chairman DeFrank noted, there's a lot of benefits there for the system as well.
Just a quick follow-up and a quick math question. I know they probably told you there wouldn't be math involved today, but I'm going to ask a quick one, an easy one. So let's assume that you have a facility that's generating 1 gigawatt or has a demand for 1 gigawatt of power. And this conversation with the utility, what is that load? What would that load forecast look like? Is it 1 gigawatt or is it something less than 1 gigawatt that you would be looking for from the grid, from the utility to provide?
I mean, that conversation varies where in different places where we operate, but it would be a gigawatt. If we were intending to build a facility that was to reach a gigawatt, we would establish a load ramp schedule where we would incrementally build to that, and then at some point in time we would hit the 1 gigawatt. But we'd be under contract to provide sufficient revenue to guarantee we would pay our costs, but it would get to 1 gigawatt eventually.
So in essence, a 1 gigawatt demand is going to require 2 gigawatts, 1 of on-site generation and 1 provided by the grid for that facility. Am I reading that right?
Is the question about a co-located facility, or is it about backup generation?
Yeah, co-located facility. So you have the demand from the facility for 1 gigawatt, and you're looking for an additional 1 gigawatt on the front of the meter.
I think the 1 gigawatt on the front of the meter would be non-firm and, would be a different service, I think, than firm, and the requirements to build are different from firm to non-firm. So I think that's likely where that would land.
And it would be part of the whole capacity of PJM, right? It goes in the whole formula. What does that number really need for the grid to be reliable is the key number, and that will vary by location. So it won't, I don't know of any market in the country where you're required to bring 100% capacity factor with you. You know, it's in that 10 to 20% range, but it gets studied, and that's part of the whole study process.
Sure. Last question. Some of your companies or your clients have recently announced that they're putting the brakes on some of the data centers. Is that information then communicated back through you or your company to the local electric distribution company and then ultimately to PJM?
We maintain very close communications with our utility partners as we develop our pipeline and continue to choose where and how we invest. And we're continuing to invest and continue to move forward aggressively. And yes, any time that a project in any part of the country is no longer moving forward, that's transparent information that we work with our utility partners to communicate.
Yeah, we're a little different. We have facilities that can be leased to multiple customers. So we haven't had the case yet where if a customer is not interested anymore, there's not someone else that we're talking to, 5 other customers about.
Thank you all for your testimony. I found it very insightful and appreciate you coming today.
Thank you, Commissioner Coleman. Commissioner Zerfus.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am also afraid of being gavelled by Judge Rainey, so I will be quick and as succinct as I can be. But do we, and by we, I mean like the royal we, right? Do we need to collaborate earlier or better in the site selection process to identify and prepare suitable locations for the development of these facilities? It could be for anyone. We don't have to go down the line. Just don't leave me hanging.
The development process with landowners, with the community, with the utility is a involved process for sure, and it's a competitive process, right? We're always trying to work backwards from where and how can we best meet our customer needs throughout the U.S. or wherever those customers want to be served from, and so ways that we can expedite and improve and increase the certainty and transparency of that is very valuable to building that business case for those sites and for those future investments. So having defined SLAs and commitments around study timelines, having flexibility and mechanisms to allow customers and utilities to work together to accelerate the realization of those investments is very valuable to making those business cases stronger in this environment.
Just to briefly add to that, I think, why we're here today and what we're talking about today, a uniform tariff, goes a long way with that. I mean, we're evaluating sites across the country, and in some states, it's from an energy perspective or a regulatory perspective, it's volatile, it's uncertain, and that will drive away investment. But in areas where there's some certainty about regulations and customers have some transparency into how these regulations are established and developed, it makes it a much better suited site to develop.
And I would just add, going across North America, it really varies widely. And when we have economic development departments and utilities that show us these are the 5 areas to locate, and you're working with the local utility and the commission. And when there's that collaboration and we know where to go and we know the timelines, which we've talked about, it really is helpful. There is a lot of publicity around large sites, but there is a lot of competition out there. There are places throughout the country that are really vying for these large, Stargate type facilities, and Pennsylvania is definitely one of those places that has the opportunity for that.
Thank you very much. Commodity costs. How should we factor energy commodity costs in the near and long term? So we know it's like the flap of the butterfly wings, can change market conditions. So do we need to factor in like fuel switching as viable options for facilities if we're tied to one particular source of energy, or is that something that we need to consider?
I'm not sure I understand your question, other than, like, we look to the market, right? And
Right.
we are on the market, and we are comfortable and expect to be paying market prices and our fair share of those market rates. And so I'm not sure what you mean by
To be
fuel switching.
responsive to the market, right? So like, the costs shift based on whatever's happening, right? Do we need to have like the ability to fuel switch at these facilities to respond to costs?
Do you mean power plant facilities?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
I think letting the market implement the right technologies that manage volatility and is what we would encourage.
Yeah, and it's usually something, natural gas is plentiful in Pennsylvania, right? And so usually those types of agreements are with the utilities, and they're properly hedging is what we've seen, and that's kind of their domain. They tell us kind of the rate to pay and all those factors that you watch over probably go forward in a rate that can be consistent and predictable for us too is helpful.
Great.
Just to add to that briefly, the commodity pricing is important, and I think the discussion we had today on the load forecast and firming that up, I think will put some downward pressure on, the PJM capacity market, which we're seeing record high prices that no one wants to see. And then also the demand side initiatives. They also reduce price, they reduce system costs, they provide flexibility, and that is absolutely within the Commission's purview, and we believe a critical issue as well.
Thank you. And last question is, I think I heard someone mention hydrogen in one of their opening comments. It might have been Lucas, I think. But the outlook for pairing data centers with emerging technology like advanced nuclear or geothermal, looking good?
I don't have any specific numbers around the use of geothermal with data centers. I would say that when it comes to fuel, optionality is very important. We do look at utilities and regulators for setting the fuel mix. From DCC's perspective, we have a very wide variety of members, and speed to market very much plays into that as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think we've heard too from Google and AWS. There are lots of conversations going on in the industry. We have to have that reliability that the grid we're used to. So those, and at a cost for all customers and sustainability. So balancing all those, and when the technology is ready for the prime time, will be critical. This is, as all the commissioners have said here, there's a lot of power coming. And so we want to make sure all those resources are ready to deliver the reliability for the grid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Zerfus. Chief, we do have one more question. She promised to be quick. Vice Chair Barrow, 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I see that in South Carolina, in Indiana, and in Virginia, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, not each in each of those states, but y'all did partner with the local EDCs to fund weatherization, energy efficiency, low-income programs, and that is a wonderful thing. But my question is, in those agreements with those states, did did your companies also agree to take on any of the responsibility for FERC transmission rate increases that would flow back to state ratepayers? Was that part of the conversation at all? Is that a no? So what I worry about is, once again, it's cost shift, right? So there's what's going on in the state side and distribution rates. But then there's also infrastructure improvements being made to the larger transmission grid, whether it be in the RTO. And there are costs that are borne by, it might be just in one rate zone in the RTO. It might be region-wide, but all of those rates flow back to EDC rates eventually. So I just want to know and was that part of the discussion?
That is part of the discussion always, but in terms of contracts and filed agreements, there's nothing in any of those state agreements, at least that I'm aware of, that, speak to that issue. And it's our belief and intention that that issue be dealt with during the standard rate-making process in a general rate case. And, the standard process that we already have, I think, is very well suited for that, where you look at the billing determinants and you look at the costs, and then you develop a cost allocation method for that, and then assign those costs. So we think that would be handled in that normal rate-making process, and has not been part of those agreements, at least that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Yeah, I will echo that, and I'll also point you to statements that have been made within, Virginia by utilities, that if you look at the allocation of those costs over time, residential ratepayers have actually seen a significant decrease. I think it's about 9% in their allocation of those transmission-related costs, whereas large industrial customers like us have seen a significant increase as we've considerably increased the denominator that goes in that spreads that cost out.
Okay, good to know that. I think, and it's going to be fact specific, right? It just depends on how much the numerator is versus the denominator. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Barrow. Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, and Commissioners. We want to thank this panel for their testimony here today, including their answers to the Commissioners' questions. Again, all of your written testimonies were admitted into evidence in this case. Mr. Chairman, are we ready for the next panel? Okay. This panel then may stand down, and we then call the distribution companies panel to the witness table.